Chapter 1. The Man Who Never Missed. To understand the horror that would come to Abilene Creek, we must first understand the man at the center of this story. We must understand Jacob Mercer. Jacob Mercer was born in 1842 in Kentucky, the son of a preacher and a school teacher. He was educated, intelligent, and by all accounts, a good man. But life on the frontier has a way of changing people. Life on the frontier has a way of hardening hearts and darkening souls. In 1863, during the Civil War, Mercer joined the Union Army. He served with distinction, earning commendations for his bravery and his marksmanship. He could shoot the eye out of a playing card at 50 paces. He could track a man through terrain that would confound ordinary trackers. He was, by all accounts, one of the finest soldiers in his regiment. But the war changed him. The violence changed him. The killing changed him. When the war ended in 1865, Mercer returned to civilian life a broken man. He couldn't hold a job, he couldn't maintain relationships, he couldn't adjust to the quiet, orderly world of peacetime. The only thing that made sense to him was the hunt. The only thing that gave him purpose was the pursuit. So, in 1868, at the age of 26, Jacob Mercer became a bounty hunter. And he was extraordinary at it. Over the next 15 years, Mercer brought in over 300 fugitives. 300 men and women who fled justice, who'd thought they could escape into the vast frontier and disappear. But Mercer always found them. Mercer always brought them back. His reputation spread throughout the frontier. Criminals feared his name. Lawmen respected his abilities. And the people who hired him, the sheriffs, the marshals, the town councils, they knew that if Jacob Mercer took a job, the fugitive would be caught. Mercer was relentless. He would pursue a target for months if necessary. He would follow trails that had gone cold. He would track men across state lines and into territories where the law had no jurisdiction. He was obsessed with his work, obsessed with the hunt, obsessed with the capture. But obsession, as they say, comes at a price. By 1883, when Mercer was 41 years old, he'd become a legend, but he'd also become something else. He'd become hollow, empty, a man who lived only for the hunt, who had no life outside of his work, who had sacrificed everything, family, love, happiness, on the altar of his obsession. In 1883, a man named Samuel Cross came to Abilene Creek. Cross was a fugitive. He'd escaped from a prison in Texas after serving 10 years for murder. He'd killed a man in a barroom brawl, and he'd done his time, but he'd never accepted his guilt. He'd never accepted his punishment. He'd escaped, and he'd fled to Abilene Creek, a remote settlement in Kansas where he thought he could disappear. But Jacob Mercer was hired to bring him back. The hunt began in the spring of 1883. Mercer arrived in Abilene Creek and began asking questions. He began gathering information. He began constructing a profile of his prey. Samuel Cross was a drinker. He was violent. He was prone to rage. He was also, according to Mercer's investigation, a creature of habit. He would frequent certain saloons. He would visit certain establishments. He would follow patterns that could be predicted. Mercer set a trap. On a night in late April, Mercer positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the main road into Abilene Creek. He knew that Cross would be traveling that road. He knew that Cross would be returning from a saloon in a neighboring town. He knew that Cross would be drunk and unprepared. Mercer waited. And then, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning from gold to purple, Mercer saw his prey. Samuel Cross, riding a horse, traveling the main road, exactly where Mercer had predicted he would be. Mercer stepped out from behind a rock formation. He had his rifle raised. He had his sights set on Cross. "Samuel Cross, you're under arrest. Come peacefully, or I will shoot you down." Cross reacted with the panic of a hunted animal. He reached for his revolver. He tried to flee. He tried to escape. But Mercer was faster. Mercer was better. Mercer fired. The bullet caught Cross in the shoulder, spinning him around. Cross fell from his horse and hit the ground hard. He tried to crawl away, but Mercer was already moving towards him. "Please," Cross begged, "please, I'll come quietly. I'll go back. Just don't kill me." But Mercer wasn't listening. Mercer was consumed by the hunt. Mercer was consumed by the capture. Mercer was consumed by something dark and terrible that lived inside him. Mercer raised his rifle and brought the stock down hard against Cross's head. Once, twice, 3 times. Cross stopped moving. Cross stopped begging. Mercer had won. Mercer had captured his prey. But he'd also crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, a line that would have consequences that neither Mercer nor anyone else could have predicted.
Chapter 2. The Hunt Ends. Jacob Mercer brought Samuel Cross back to Abilene Creek. Cross was alive, barely, his head bleeding, his shoulder shattered. Mercer took him to the local doctor, who patched him up as best he could. Then Mercer prepared to transport Cross back to Texas, back to the prison, back to the justice system that had failed him once before. But something was wrong. Something had changed in Mercer during that final hunt. Something had broken inside him. Mercer began to complain of headaches, severe, debilitating headaches that made it difficult for him to think, to function, to do anything but lie in his hotel room and suffer. The local doctor examined him and found nothing wrong. Mercer's physical health was excellent, but his mental state was deteriorating. Mercer became paranoid. He became convinced that Samuel Cross was going to escape. He became convinced that Cross had friends, allies, people who would help him flee. He became convinced that the hunt wasn't over, that the hunt would never be over. On the night before Mercer was supposed to transport Cross to Texas, something extraordinary happened. According to the testimony of the hotel clerk, Mercer left his room around midnight. He was agitated, confused, speaking incoherently about the hunt continuing, about prey escaping, about the need to pursue and capture and kill. The clerk tried to stop him, but Mercer pushed past him and headed for the stable where his horse was kept. Mercer saddled his horse, he loaded his rifle, and he rode out into the night, heading toward the ridge where he'd captured Samuel Cross. The townspeople didn't understand what was happening. They didn't understand why Mercer was riding out into the darkness. They didn't understand that Mercer's obsession had finally consumed him completely. They didn't understand that Jacob Mercer had finally crossed over into madness. Samuel Cross, meanwhile, was being held in the local jail. He was under guard. He was secure. There was no way for him to escape. But Mercer didn't know that. Mercer's mind had fractured. Mercer's obsession had become a psychosis. Mercer was convinced that Samuel Cross was still hunting, still fleeing, still trying to escape. So Mercer rode to the ridge where he'd captured Cross, and he waited. He waited for hours. He waited in the darkness, his rifle loaded, his senses heightened, his mind consumed by the hunt. He waited for prey that wasn't coming. He waited for a chase that had already ended. And then, around 3 a.m, Mercer heard something. Hoofbeats, a horse approaching, a figure moving through the darkness. Mercer didn't hesitate. Mercer didn't question. Mercer simply reacted. He raised his rifle and fired. The figure fell from the horse. Mercer rushed forward to confirm the kill, to ensure that his prey was dead. But when he reached the body, Mercer's blood ran cold. It wasn't Samuel Cross. It was a man named Thomas Garrett, a local rancher who'd been riding home from a late-night visit to a neighboring town. Garrett had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Garrett had been mistaken for the prey. And now Garrett was dead. Mercer stood over the body, his rifle still in his hands, and something inside him shattered completely. He'd killed an innocent man. His obsession had led him to commit murder. His hunt had finally gone too far. Mercer fell to his knees. He began to scream, a scream so terrible, so filled with anguish and despair that it echoed across the prairie like a cry of a wounded animal. The townspeople heard the scream. They rushed to the ridge and found Mercer kneeling over the body of Thomas Garrett, his rifle on the ground beside him, his mind completely broken. Mercer was arrested. He was taken into custody, and he was tried for the murder of Thomas Garrett. The trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. Mercer had killed an innocent man in a fit of psychotic delusion. Mercer was found guilty, and Mercer was sentenced to death by hanging. The execution was set for a Friday morning in June of 1883. The entire town of Abilene Creek turned out to witness it. They wanted to see Jacob Mercer, the legendary bounty hunter, finally face justice for his crimes. Mercer was led to the gallows. He was calm, resigned, as if he'd finally accepted the consequences of his obsession. He was asked if he had any final words. And Mercer said something that would haunt Abilene Creek for generations to come. He said, "The hunt never ends. The hunt never stops. Even death won't stop me from hunting. Even death won't stop me from pursuing my prey. I will hunt forever. I will pursue forever, and I will never, ever rest." Then the noose was placed around his neck, the trapdoor was opened, and Jacob Mercer fell. The rope snapped tight, Jacob Mercer's neck broke, and Jacob Mercer was dead. But his words lingered in the air like a curse. His words seemed to hang over Abilene Creek like a dark cloud. His words suggested that something terrible was about to happen. And they were right.
Chapter 3: The Return. 3 nights after Jacob Mercer was hanged, something impossible happened in Abilene Creek. A man named William Hayes was riding home from the saloon around midnight when he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure on horseback riding toward him out of the darkness. A figure that seemed wrong somehow. A figure that seemed incomplete. As the figure got closer, Hayes realized what he was seeing. The rider had no head. Where a head should have been, there was only empty space. Empty space above the shoulders, empty space above the neck. Hayes tried to turn his horse around and flee, but he found that he couldn't move. It was as if an invisible force was holding him in place, forcing him to watch as the headless rider approached. The headless rider stopped a few feet away from Hayes, and then, impossibly, it spoke. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The voice was hollow, echoing, as if it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Have you seen him?" the headless rider asked. "Have you seen Samuel Cross? He's escaped. He's fleeing. I must pursue. I must capture. I must hunt." Hayes tried to speak, but no words came out. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He could only watch as the headless rider turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the darkness. When Hayes finally managed to move, he rode directly to the sheriff's office and reported what he'd seen. The sheriff, a man named Edward Thorne, dismissed Hayes's account as the ravings of a drunk man. Hayes had been drinking, after all. Hayes was clearly confused, clearly mistaken. But then other reports began to come in. A woman named Sarah Mitchell reported seeing a headless rider on the road to her ranch. The rider had asked her if she'd seen Samuel Cross. The rider had seemed agitated, confused, as if searching for prey that had already escaped. A man named Robert Caldwell reported seeing a headless rider at the cemetery, standing over the grave of Jacob Mercer. The rider had seemed to be mourning, grieving, as if confused about why he was dead, why he was no longer alive. And then came the most disturbing report of all. Samuel Cross, the man who'd been held in the jail, the man who'd been the object of Mercer's obsession, had escaped. He'd somehow gotten out of his cell during the night. He'd somehow managed to flee Abilene Creek. And the headless rider was pursuing him. According to eyewitness accounts, the headless rider had ridden through the streets of Abilene Creek searching for Cross. The rider had moved with purpose, with determination, as if following a trail that only he could see. The rider had known exactly where Cross was going, exactly where Cross would be. And then, on the road leading out of Abilene Creek, the headless rider caught up with Samuel Cross. According to a witness who saw the encounter from a distance, the headless rider simply reached out and grabbed Cross by the collar. Cross tried to flee, tried to fight, but the headless rider was impossibly strong. The headless rider lifted Cross from his horse and held him suspended in the air. And then the headless rider did something that defied explanation. The headless rider's body began to glow with an eerie, sickly light. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. And then there was a sound like thunder, like the sky itself was tearing open. When the light faded, Samuel Cross was gone. Completely gone. There was no body, no trace of him, nothing to suggest that he'd ever existed. The headless rider sat on his horse for a moment, as if satisfied, as if the hunt had finally been completed. And then he turned and rode back toward Abilene Creek. But the hunt wasn't over. The hunt would never be over. Because Mercer's obsession had transcended death. Mercer's need to hunt, to pursue, to capture had become a force that couldn't be stopped by anything as trivial as death or the grave. The headless rider had returned, and he was still hunting.
Chapter 4. The Endless Hunt. In the weeks and months following the appearance of the headless rider, Abilene Creek descended into chaos and terror. The headless rider began to appear regularly. Every night, around midnight, the figure would ride through the streets of the town searching for prey. And the rider always found someone. The rider always identified someone who needed to be hunted, who needed to be captured, who needed to be brought to justice. But the rider's definition of justice had become twisted, corrupted, transformed by death and obsession into something dark and terrible. The first victim after Samuel Cross was a man named Marcus Webb. Webb was a petty criminal, a man who'd stolen from the general store. It was a minor crime, a crime that would have resulted in a few months in jail and a fine. But the headless rider decided that Webb needed to be hunted. The rider pursued Webb through the streets of Abilene Creek. Webb ran, screaming, trying to escape, but the headless rider was relentless. The rider chased Webb to the edge of town, to the ridge where Jacob Mercer had captured Samuel Cross. And then the rider did something that defied explanation. The rider reached out and touched Webb on the shoulder, and Webb simply ceased to exist. His body dissolved into dust. His screams faded into silence. He was gone. Then came the case of Catherine Sinclair. Catherine was a prostitute, a woman who'd been arrested multiple times for her profession. The headless rider decided that Catherine needed to be hunted. The rider pursued her through the town, cornering her in an alley behind the saloon. Catherine tried to fight. Catherine tried to run, but the headless rider was unstoppable. The rider grabbed Catherine and lifted her into the air, and then the rider's body began to glow with that same sickly light. Catherine screamed as her body began to dissolve, as she began to fade from existence. And then she was gone. The townspeople began to understand what was happening. They began to realize that the headless rider wasn't simply a ghost or a phantom. The headless rider was something far more dangerous.
The headless rider was a force of judgment, a force of punishment, a force that had decided to clean up Abilene Creek by eliminating everyone who'd ever committed even the slightest crime. The townspeople began to flee. Families packed up their belongings and left. Businesses closed. The streets became empty and desolate. But the headless rider didn't stop. The rider continued to hunt. The rider continued to pursue. The rider continued to eliminate anyone who'd ever wronged anyone else, anyone who'd ever committed any crime, no matter how minor. The town council met in emergency session. They discussed what could be done. They discussed how to stop the headless rider. They discussed whether there was any way to end the terror that had consumed their town. And then someone suggested something radical. Someone suggested that they should try to communicate with the headless rider. Someone suggested that they should try to reason with Jacob Mercer's ghost, try to convince him that his work was done, try to convince him to rest. So the town council decided to hold a meeting. They decided to invite the headless rider to come and speak with them. They decided to try to negotiate with a force that had already proven to be beyond negotiation. On a night when the moon was full and bright, the town council gathered in the town hall. They waited. They watched the doors. They waited for the headless rider to appear. And then, at the stroke of midnight, the headless rider rode directly through the front doors of the town hall. The horses' hooves clattered on the wooden floor. The headless rider dismounted and walked toward the assembled council members. The council members tried to speak. They tried to explain. They tried to reason with Jacob Mercer's ghost. But the headless rider simply raised his hand, and one by one the council members began to scream. Their bodies began to glow with that same sickly light. Their forms began to dissolve into dust. Within minutes, the entire town council had been eliminated. The headless rider turned and rode back out of the town hall, leaving behind only silence and the faint smell of sulfur. Abilene Creek was dying. The town was being consumed by the obsession of a dead man. The town was being hunted to extinction by a force that couldn't be stopped, couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be killed because it was already dead. And then something unexpected happened. Something that would change the course of events in ways that no one could have predicted.
Chapter 5. The Revelation. In the chaos and terror of Abilene Creek's final days, a woman named Eleanor Mercer came forward with a revelation that would change everything. Eleanor Mercer was Jacob Mercer's sister. She'd been living in Abilene Creek, unknown to most of the townspeople. She'd been watching the headless rider's rampage with growing horror and growing understanding. Eleanor revealed that Jacob Mercer had left behind a journal in which he documented his descent into madness, a journal in which he'd written about his obsession, his need to hunt, his inability to stop, even when he knew that his obsession was destroying him. But most importantly, Eleanor revealed that Jacob Mercer had written about his fear that even death wouldn't stop him, his fear that his obsession would transcend death and continue forever, his fear that he would become a force of eternal hunting, pursuing prey that didn't exist, completing hunts that had already been completed. And Eleanor revealed something else. She revealed that Jacob Mercer had left behind instructions for how to stop the headless rider,
instructions for how to end the eternal hunt. According to Jacob's journal, the only way to stop the headless rider was to give him what he truly wanted. Not to stop him, not to fight him, but to give him closure. To give him the knowledge that his work was complete. To give him the understanding that he could finally rest. And Eleanor decided to try this. She decided to confront the headless rider herself. On a night when the moon was full and bright, Eleanor rode out to the ridge where Jacob Mercer had captured Samuel Cross. She waited there, alone, for the headless rider to appear. And he did. The headless rider emerged from the darkness, his horse moving with an otherworldly grace. The rider approached Eleanor, and Eleanor heard that hollow, echoing voice ask, "Have you seen him? Have you seen the prey? The hunt continues. The hunt never ends." And Eleanor said something that would finally bring the endless hunt to an end. She said, "Jacob, the hunt is complete. Samuel Cross has been captured. Justice has been served. Your work is done. You can rest now. You can finally rest." For a long moment, nothing happened. The headless rider simply stood there, silent, as if processing this information, as if trying to understand what Eleanor was saying. And then, slowly, the rider's body began to change. The rider began to become more transparent, more ghostly, more ethereal. The rider's form began to fade. And then, in a voice that was almost human, almost recognizable as Jacob Mercer's voice, the headless rider said, "Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for letting me know that I can finally rest." And then the headless rider was gone. The horse was gone. The ridge was empty, except for Eleanor, standing there alone under the full moon. Abilene Creek was saved. The terror was over. The endless hunt had finally ended. But the question remained, was the headless rider truly gone, or was he simply resting, waiting for the next obsessed soul to join him in the eternal hunt? Was he truly at peace, or was he simply waiting for the next opportunity to pursue prey that would never be caught?
Epilogue. The mystery remains. The story of the headless bounty hunter of Abilene Creek raises questions that we may never be able to answer. Was Jacob Mercer truly a ghost? Was he a manifestation of pure obsession? Was he a force of nature that had taken the form of a dead man? What we do know is that Abilene Creek was forever changed by the events of 1883. What we do know is that the town never fully recovered from the terror that consumed it. What we do know is that the legend has endured for over a century. And what we also know is that people continue to report sightings of a headless rider on the roads around Abilene Creek. Sightings of a figure on horseback, searching for prey, pursuing fugitives that have long since been captured or died. Some say that the headless rider is still hunting. Some say that the obsession of Jacob Mercer was so powerful that it transcended death itself and continues to this day.
And some say that if you ever find yourself on a road near Abilene Creek on a night when the moon is full, and you see a figure on horseback with no head, no face, nothing but empty space above the shoulders, then you should run. You should run as fast as you can, because the Headless Rider is still hunting, and he never, ever misses. This has been Mysteries of the Old West. Thank you for joining us as we explored the darkness of America's frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the paranormal mysteries of the Old West. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and remember, some obsessions are so powerful that they transcend death itself. The Headless Rider is still hunting.